Hello, Sobbles and Score Bunnies. My name is Tibius Guy, and that was a bit of a Pokemon Direct, wasn't it? I'm pretty excited for the next generation of Pokemon fun gameplay on the Nintendo Switch system, trademark, TM, copyright, and stuff. Now, I would love nothing more than to just dive directly into the trailer footage and talk about what we were seeing, but unfortunately, it turns out that Nintendo has apparently, and it's hard to confirm these things, but apparently has been a little bit aggressive in copyright striking people who upload the footage unedited to talk over it, which is why you're looking at a static image right now. We're going to be a little bit careful about how we proceed through the trailer, so that hopefully the Content IT system won't, screw my entire channel over. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at the trailer footage that we have. We're going to be talking about some of the stuff that appears in it, some of the aesthetics, some of the visual style that is on display, some of what kind of a world it is that we can expect that Pokemon is building for us here. And we're going to talk about as much of that as we can with a little bit of speculation on the gameplay mechanics and such. And as you may know, yesterday, before the Direct, I made a video with predictions and hopes and dreams for the new Pokemon generation. Now, my hopes and dreams have been met to a larger degree than I could have hoped for, but still, most of them were shattered pretty definitively by Nintendo today, which I expected. But we're going to be taking a look at my predictions, at the very least, and talking a little bit about what I got wrong, which is a lot, and some of the things that maybe I got something right. Who knows? Well, we'll certainly try and find out if I was not wrong about something. That would be great. But for the moment, let's just get straight into it. Here we have some of the first shots of the trailer. And as it's fairly well known right now, this game is going to be set in a version of the English countryside. It's going to be set in a version of Britain that's been sort of Pokemonified, and that seemed to be manifesting, at least in this opening area. This is Route 01, as you can tell by, looking at the road sign there in the foreground. You're going to start out in a quaint English village, essentially. A sort of a quaint countryside English village somewhere in the south of England, perhaps. I'm not super familiar with English geography, unfortunately, and then you'll be making your way through until you reach the very north of the British Isles, which in our modern world would be Scotland, which is a highland full of mountains, which is where apparently the Pokemon League, but also this game's version of London seems to be located. At least that's as far as I can glean from the map that was released, especially. I think Cerebi has a very high-quality version of what the particular map looks like. But what we're getting here is just a quintessential idyllic English countryside idyll. This is just golden fields and rolling hills and green meadows and lovely little cottages stretched all about the countryside, governor. And I'm terribly sorry to the entire nation of Britain for that accent. And what's curious to me a little bit about some of what's going on here is the particular architectural style that's on display in some of the stuff here, because it's not just entirely based on English architectural tropes and stereotypes. There's a lot of sort of a pan-Germanic, almost a little bit of a Scandinavian slant to some of the designs of the houses that interest me a little bit. And as usual, Pokemon, even when it's based in one particular region or another, will draw inspiration from multiple things that are hanging around in the periphery of those regions in some interesting ways, which I thought was quite fascinating. You can also see immediately on display, there's a little bit of English public school fashion aesthetic going on here with, the collared shirt and the pants, and you can see it again here with the braided sweater thing that the female trainer archetype is wearing, and the boots, which is certainly a far cry from the sort of the tropical fashions of Alola, or indeed the sort of more restrained fashions that have been on display in previous games. This is much more regional. This is much more like a specific reference to a style of dress from a particular place. But what I really wanted to look at is this little moment right here, where you can really... The sense of scale here is amazing to me, especially as someone who remembers Sun and Moon, which was like, it was a game that tried to be a little bit more free with making the regions of Pokemon look larger. It never achieved anything even remotely like this. And this is where I'm talking about aesthetics, because this is not, insofar as I can tell from the very little gameplay footage we've gotten so far, any kind of an open world game, which is one of the things that I was really hoping for, you would, not an open world game in sense of Breath of the Wild, but an open world game in the sense of go to whichever gym you want, and then you can move on to the next one, and things will sort of scale up in level automatically. As you beat more and more gyms, you'll run into tougher and tougher Pokemon and tougher trainers and stuff like that. So that doesn't seem to be happening here, but something that I'm really, really pleased to see is that this looks like a big open world, right? Even if it isn't, this looks like a big, wide open, just completely gloriously fully realized open world. It looks as though if you weren't confined to only walking along these paths, you know, bounded in by these railings and stuff, you would be able to wander off into the countryside over those hills to discover whatever you may be wanting to discover out there. And similarly, the same kind of feeling I get from a screenshot like this one particularly, that this is gonna be a forest where there's like raised embankments all along, and you just get herded along a particular path through the forest. But the aesthetics and the visuals of the surrounding area, like the mist and the tall trees and the high level of fidelity and realization on so much of the graphics there, high level for the Switch, not high level for the current generation of consoles. It just gives much more of a sense of an open, living, breathing place. And it's the same thing here. Like, presumably, you will be able to go to like most of the stuff you can see here in this particular. I guess it's a version of. This wouldn't be a version of London. It might be a version of one of the northern cities, like Liverpool, something like that. One of the northern industrial cities is what this seems to be making reference to. But there is a sense that there is a big city out there. And that's the trouble that Pokemon always had with the top-down perspective that it's been locked into for so long, is that no matter how much of the world they rendered and realized and designed around you, you only ever got a very limited... you only saw a narrow box version of whatever world and whatever environment you were stuck in. You never really got to see the wider world, which is something like a few games tried to make the camera swing around as you were walking over bridges or going through past particular vistas, but you never had free camera control to really look around, to really feel immersed. And that's the thing I'm really, really excited about, is that it looks like we have a situation where you can use the right analog stick to freely control the camera and look around and actually see the world about you. And that's like just the sheer feeling of being able to do that is going to be so amazing for me. Because, like, again, this screenshot here, maybe you can go to that cottage over there, I don't know, but it certainly looks like there's something there to explore. There's something there to see if there happens to be a path that you can go there with. And I'm so stoked to have finally the proper third-person over-the-shoulder camera angle. That can really be... And here you can see the linearity, right? Here you can see that, oh, well, you can only really walk along the promenade and then go up there and explore a little bit and then maybe walk into that alley a little bit, but there's nothing really there, but you have to follow the path around the place. But even still, it feels so much bigger. It feels so much more open. I do love the red brick buildings. Like, that's really sort of a quintessential industrializing Britain kind of feel to those, big red brick buildings. And also, again, Scandinavian, we have a lot of those red brick buildings in Scandinavia as well, especially in places like Copenhagen and some of the older parts of the city. You can see buildings exactly like that, which is something that's quite new to me, because Pokemon regions, to me, have always felt quite foreign. Like, even when they were based in stuff like France, and they had, what was it, X and Y, where they had the New York region, or that was based on some, like, big American city thing, I don't remember, especially. They never really felt like anything that was plausible to like. It didn't feel like something you could actually visit, something that looks kind of like it. It always felt extremely fantasy. It always felt extremely like it comes from a foreign reality. And Alola in Sun and Moon would probably feel familiar to people who actually live in various Pacific islands and stuff like that, or in tropical nations. But again, very far away, very foreign to me as a Northern European. This, though, this looks like a glamorized, slightly glitzed up version of stuff that I could actually go and see. Like, probably not a stadium, a gym, I presume it's the grass gym, that looks like that, but... standing stones with strange carvings on them, yeah, we've got those. Like cottages and fields and hills and trees and stuff that looks kind of like this. That's not really epic and mountainous, but just kind of a little lumpy and bumpy after the last ice age. Yeah, we've got that. And that excites me a lot. Now, obviously, we are going to be heading into some slightly more outrageous territory, as the male Pokemon trainer seems to be demonstrating here that there's going to be a little bit of heading up into some frosty mountains. But we'll talk a little bit about that frost later, because I think there might be a funny thing going on there. But there is a down-to-earth sense here of something that is not realistic, because Pokemon never is, but something that feels more real than any Pokemon game has before. And here I want to look at, I do love the combat. Like, in most Pokemon games, certainly the handheld ones, the backgrounds would not have been this detailed. Usually they'll use, like, a 2D painted background thrown up on a skybox behind the action that's going on. But what I'm noticing here, and it's pretty subtle, but if you look at the tree over here, and then you look at that relative to the roof and the buildings behind it, there's parallax scrolling going on here. Like, the various elements of the background are not a static 2D image projected onto a skybox. They move relative to one another. Now, there are clearly relatively low-resolution flat images that are being placed at various points in the 3D plane to give the illusion of depth where none exists, but that's still, again, visually, it's a step up. Like, it really is a step up in what the battle scenes feel like as well. Like, this feels much more like it takes place here, like in this environment, than previous battle scenes where you get this generic grass area, generic desert area background going on in a lot of the combat scenes. This feels much more present in the place that your character is walking around. Because, again, the Switch has a lot more graphical power going on. Now here, remember how the male Pokemon trainer was heading up into the hills in order to do a thing, that there was snow and ice and stuff going on? Well, take a look at that. Oh, hello. Take a look at that. Those are sunbathing chairs. Which interested me a little bit. Oh, it's wishy-washy. Which interested me a little bit because the implication there is that this area is not normally all ice and snow. That maybe this area is normally a little bit nice and warm and for fishing and bathing and swimming and having fun. And maybe all of this ice stuff that's going on, all this frozen nonsense that's happening, maybe that's not happening for natural reasons. And this is where I want to speculate a little bit on the story, because what if the story of Pokemon, like, there's so many times the themes of Pokemon games have been environmental. They've been about, oh, this Team Evil guys want to use the power of the legendary Pokemon to change the environment, or flood the world, or make more land, or call down a meteor, or whatever. Like, often there's environmental themes in Pokemon, which makes sense. What if here we're dealing with a situation where during the gameplay, someone or something has caused this ice to be here, this ice to happen, and your job as a trainer is to make it go away, so that we're actually dealing with, if you beat Team X on their ice generator somewhere up in the hills, the landscape itself will change. A voice break, haven't had that since I was 15, will change, and you'll be able to go to new areas, you'll unlock some particular part of the world map, and you can change the weather and stuff like that. I get a vague feeling that something like that might be going on, because, like, this is sort of supposed to be based on Britain, right? It's supposed to be based on that particular region of the world, but look at this. Like, I've been to Britain a few times. I don't recall seeing deserts, like, or canyon areas like this around when I was there. I don't recall that being a particular part of British geography, so maybe there's some kind of environmental altering thing going on. And of course, we have a Pokemon Stadium here, with its most explicit reference being to, as you can kind of see from the markings on the ground, a soccer stadium, which is something that comes up again a bit later in the trailer as the male Pokemon trainer. Let's see if we can get ourselves back to it. Premiere Pro, please don't be so slow in buffering things. There we go. As the male Pokemon trainer is heading out into, I presume this is the Pokemon League, because it looks like a really big stadium, but he's dressed as a soccer player, which I thought was a clever little, like, Britain is obsessed with soccer, obviously. It's the home of a lot of very high-level soccer, and I hate calling it soccer because it's called football, but Americans watch this damn channel, so... and I really love the visual reference to that, of exiting through the vomitorium, and yes, that is what that is called, this little entryway into a coliseum or a stadium. It's called the vomitorium, because you spew forth from the thing. A little bit of trivia here for you that I thought you might find interesting. And the explicit visual reference is to soccer. It's to football, which I thought was that's a really nice way to incorporate Britain, not just Britain, but also Europe, into the Pokemon world. And I do like. I know it's not gonna happen, but every single Pokemon game, every time there's a new Pokemon generation, the new game will have some kind of pointless mini-game, side game that you have to participate in, like Pokemon modeling, or Pokemon racing, or Pokemon contests where they do moves and impress an audience, or whatever. Like, pointless mini-games that most, for me, just are annoying, but you can get some prizes if you grind them. I look at this and I just can't help but think Pokemon soccer. Pokemon soccer. You field your team of 6 Pokemon, and they play a soccer game against another team of 6 Pokemon. That would rule. That would rule so hard. That would be so cool. And I don't know why they haven't already done that. Like, Mario keeps getting sports games good. You have a Pokemon thing. Anyway, that would be cool. Probably not what's going to happen because, again, with the glove on the kid's right hand here, that says to me, oh, it's the arm with which he throws the Pokeball, so this is about him throwing Pokeballs at things, i.e., we are about to go into the Pokemon League. A boy can dream. Do not crush my hopes and dreams, but yeah. Aesthetically also, by the way, because of the greater graphical power, I think, of the Nintendo Switch, we're also getting a slightly more grown-up protagonist. Now, if you remember Sun and Moon, the protagonists tended to be a bit shorter than this. This protagonist is like, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 heads tall, which is a fairly standard type of proportion for children in a lot of character design. But the scale of the environments and the scale of how big is your protagonist relative to like a wheelbarrow that's hanging around, how big is your protagonist relative to objects in the environment, buildings in the environment, how big are the trees in relative and to the protagonist. We're getting a much more, again, that this also adds to the sense of scale that I was kind of gushing about earlier, that these protagonists look much more like natural proportion, like young kids in the world that they are inhabiting, which is something that, again, in Sun and Moon, because of the 3DS's lower graphical power, they couldn't really render things at this scale, at these scales, without making some massive compromises. And so we had this much more chibi-like, much more small-looking style going on in those games, and I'm really happy to see that the aesthetic has grown up just a little bit. This was another thing that I was including in my hopes and dreams, is that I wanted the aesthetic to be just a little bit more, more grown up. Not like dark and gritty and edgy or anything, but just a little bit more realistic, just a little bit more real, so that the world stops feeling so much like a cartoon and starts feeling a little bit more like, well, like a traditional RPG, a little bit more like your Dragon Quests, a little bit more like your Bravely Defaults or something like that, something that's a bit more open and expansive. And I'm really, really pleased to see that they've fully committed to that. And it's probably also that we're dealing with fashions that are more inspired by, contemporary or some version of contemporary Britain and Northern Europe, which makes some of the fashions that are going on here a little bit more down to earth, maybe than they've been in previous games, which we can also see when we're dealing with opposing trainers. Here we have presumably a lass, clearly wearing some kind of a school uniform, but a school uniform that you might see in a British public school. And the same thing for this kid down here, is like wearing a sweater with a collared shirt underneath and stuff like that. It feels a little bit more grounded. It feels a little bit more plausible. Not realistic at all, but plausible at the very least. Which I quite enjoy. And yeah, I mean, everything about this trailer just it's so much more of the feeling of Pokemon that I want. It's so much more of the kind of Pokemon world that I've been excited to get into. And again, here you can see the scale of the characters, right? This character looks like she's inside of a very large building that is not built just to contain, like, a few characters. We need to do some voice lines and then get out of here. It feels much more like an inhabited, lived-in space than a lot of buildings have done in the past. Same thing goes here. Like, this feels more like an actual living room that you might find in a house, right? Whereas in previous games, because the scale has been necessarily constrained, because you have the top-down perspective, it always kind of felt like, oh, there's a room with some furniture in it, and then there's like an NPC you can talk to, but it didn't really feel like anyone's actual house. It didn't really feel like a place where someone would actually live. It felt like a stage. Like, it felt like a little dollhouse that you could put some NPCs in that you could talk to in order to get a voice line about how great it is to live alongside Pokemon and work together with them to do things. That's super cool. Oh, by the way, this is a hill figure. Now, this particular hill figure especially might be a reference to something like the Churn Abbas Giant, or the Kern Abbas Giant. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. And hill figures are, essentially, they're representations of various figures that have been cut out by people on the British Isles for hundreds, if perhaps not even thousands of years. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of them all over the British Isles. The Uffington White Horse, the Longmen of Wilmington, the Westbury White Horse, the Churl White Horse, the Mormond White Horse, the Marlborough White Horse, the Osmington White Horse, the Elton Barnes White Horse, the Hackpen White Horse. There's a lot of white horses, like, basically, but also a lot of figures of people. And this ties into a longer tradition of geoglyphs, which is something that you see all over the world. Like, many peoples all across the world have had this idea of drawing figures in the environment. Perhaps to get the attention of the gods, perhaps to invoke some kind of spell, call down some kind of blessing, or just because they were artistic and they wanted to do this thing to represent themselves or their community, or whatever the case may be. They sometimes would depict gods or divine figures, but oftentimes not really so much. Sometimes they just depicted horses a lot, or legendary figures from some kind of local folkloric tale. And oftentimes they'll be made by, as you can see, by clearing out the grass on a long hill and creating the figure essentially by tracing out shapes in the dirt. And in some places you'd have chalk hiding underneath the grass, and then you get these beautiful bright white lines that really you could see from miles and miles away. These bright white figures traced out in the countryside, and they're beautiful, and I was really happy to see that represented here. Now, I've already seen some speculation that this right here is gonna be one of the legendary Pokemon. If so, it seems to have been designed by character designers from Riot Games circa 2009, because them's pizza feet. But yeah, that's certainly that's possible. Like, this is definitely going to be one of those things where you go there and there's going to be like an old man or some dude standing there, some encounter with the champion or some important mysterious scientist figure in the story is going to come up and go, oh yes, this is the blah, blah, blah hill figure representing the time when the Pokemon did the thing, and then the humans were like, oh, Pokemon, and they built a thing, and that was important, and yada yada, and it's gonna foreshadow the evil plot of the bad guys to do the thing with the Pokemon and undo something. But in reality, they are a little bit more pedestrian than that. They would often just represent horses or things that people were interested in, things that mattered to them at the time. And yeah, the oldest, I think, of these hill figures, like, go back to like 1,000 years before Christ. That's the Uffington White Horse, which is truly an ancient bit of hill figure, truly an ancient hill figure, and an amazing one too. It's a gorgeous representation of a horse. I recommend that you go and look up pictures of it on your own if you can, because it's a really cool thing. So I was just really happy to see that. As a bit of a history nerd, I was really happy to see that included in the trailer, like that they made a reference to that particular feature of the English and of the British countryside. That was cool. I'm also interested in this polar region. Now, if you look over here, this flag clearly has some castle imagery on it, which again, We're in Britain. Of course, there's going to be like knights and castles and references to that kind of stuff. But I'm curious about whether, like I said, I was wondering if there's going to be some kind of weather changing mechanic, and that's going to be the thing that's going on. And the reason why I think so also is that there's a whole lot of green plants hanging around in this environment, almost as though the people who live here weren't really expecting there to be a lot of snow all of a sudden. They were, in fact, expecting it to be a little bit warmer than it actually turns out to be. So I'm curious about that. But I'm also curious if whether what we're seeing is maybe seasons. Like that the game has actual seasonal change going on in it, and for every X in-game days, the season will change and the types of Pokemon that show up will be different. That, too, would be quite cool. I also like that there's mines. Britain, of course, has a very long history with mining, especially coal mining, but they seem to be mining something altogether a little bit more rare and precious in the coal mines that we see in this particular trailer. By the way, this is obviously a Pokemon lab. Presumably there's a Pokemon professor hanging out here somewhere, from whom maybe you get a Pokemon, or maybe it's some research lab for some kind of other thing, but that's definitely what's going on there. I do like the library, though. I do like the little detail with the staircase up and the whole thing. It's very well realized. Is that about all I have to say about the trailer? Is that about all? I think maybe it might just be. So, as for predictions, we don't seem to be getting the kind of open world that I was quite hoping for. But we do get the third-person perspective going on that I was quite happy with. And looking at some of the combat animation, I mean, I can't be sure because, again, this is not really footage from the game itself, in the sense that you don't have the UI, you don't have the whole thing going on. But it does seem to me that everything is working a little bit snappier, like that the action is happening a little bit quicker, at least in the way that this trailer is cut. So I'm kind of hoping that I was right about that. Like I'm hoping that we're gonna get some combat and some grinding and some just generally battle mechanics in this game that happen just a little bit faster. They just happen just a little bit faster than they used to. Now, as for the story of the game, obviously this trailer isn't really showing off anything, but I do note with interest that there's no hint of of side characters like you got in Pokemon Sun and Moon with like Lily and Gladion and that whole thing of the island challenge and that particular professor. There's no hint of any of that in this particular trailer for the game. That doesn't tell us that there won't be some kind of elaborate side story with other characters who have their own stuff going on. The thing I was worried about, and the thing that bothered me about Sun and Moon, was that you were not really a character in the story. You were some kid who happened to have moved to Alola, and then you tagged along with other characters while they had their stories going on. Like, that happened with Lily, and with Cosmog, and Lucamina, and Gladion, and all of that stuff was happening around you, but you weren't really part of it. You didn't really have a stake in it or a relationship with any of the antagonists or any kind of interest in what's going on beyond I'm following these people around and occasionally doing Pokemon battles because of plot reasons. Here, no hint of any side characters whatsoever. No hint of any larger plot that's going on. Like, I did some vague speculation based on some weather stuff, but there's really no hint of what kind of story might be going on, except eventually you need to get your butt to the Pokemon League to become the very best, like no one ever was. And that, to me, is quite pleasing. I hope that that's a sign of what they've done with the game, that they've really scaled back on the extemporaneous story and left that to side quests and things like that and focused back in on just the Pokemon journey, the trainer, the journey, becoming the Pokemon Master, without a whole lot of running around and doing mother-daughter parent drama about some conspiracy thing and alternate dimensions and stuff like that. Hopefully. Hopefully. I thought in my predictions that the game would be top-down. Like, I thought they'd be going back to that because that's Pokemon tradition. It's the first game on the Switch. They wouldn't want to be taking risks about it. I was wrong about that. I was quite pleased to be wrong about that. I thought that the aesthetic of the game would be Pokemon Let's Go influenced. That because they want to bring in the Pokemon Go players, that they would go with an aesthetic that's clearly influenced by Let's Go. That hasn't really happened at all. Whether in the avatars or in the environment design, this doesn't look like Let's Go. This doesn't look like Let's Go aesthetic. It doesn't look... Let's Go had this very clean, kind of sterile, sanitary look, where everything glowed just a little bit. Everything looked a little bit more plastic. And in this version of the Pokemon world, like, if you take a look at just these little overgrown, mossy walls of the environment, and you can see how deformed the terrain is. Like, there's curves and bulges and bumps and lumps everywhere. And just the luscious, just almost extremely extra amount of texture that goes into the wheat fields. And you can see just the frontage piece of this cottage, which is so overgrown with leaves and this texture everywhere, and this sense of shape and feeling everywhere that really wasn't present in Pokemon Let's Go. They have not gone with a Let's Go inspired aesthetic, and I'm quite pleased with that as well. I was right that we were going to go back to a continental setting, but everyone and their grandmother predicted that. I was hoping for South America. I was hoping for something like Australia, but it turned out it was Britain, as the rumors have been saying for ages and ages. There's no hint of motion controls in the trailer that we've seen so far. Like, there's no hint that you're going to be doing like a Pokemon Let's Go style catching system, or that the motion controls are going to come into play when it comes to playing with your Pokemon or interacting with the environment or anything like that. But again, this is like not really even a gameplay trailer. It's more like game footage. It's more like in-game footage than gameplay as such. So don't know how that's going to be shaking out. I'm hoping that ride Pokemon will be back. We didn't see any hints of that here. We didn't see any characters riding Pokemon or using Pokemon as partners in the field. We didn't even see any sign of Pokemon really in the overworld at any point. We see, I think it's one interaction where the female Pokemon trainer is inside someone's house talking to a Munchlax, but that's about all we see of Pokemon being present outside of battles. So I'm curious about that. I'm curious about whether ride Pokemon will be making a return. I really hope so, because I really don't want to. I really just don't want to deal with HMs anymore. As for predictions about the starters, now I predicted that the water starter will be the cool one, but the grass starter will be the cute one. And I was wrong about that. It's definitely the fire starter that's going for the coolness factor, and it's the water starter that's going 100% for the cute factor and the cute appeal. Whereas we get what might be called... it's also... I mean, they're all cute because they're Pokemon starters, but the division between them I had envisioned certainly did not come to pass. What else? What else? Oh yeah, I also thought that they would announce spin-off games, like a follow-up to Detective Pikachu, or Detective Pikachu port to Switch, or another Let's Go game, or Pokemon Snap for Switch, or something like that. They certainly said that they have more stuff to announce, that they have more games that they want to talk about eventually, later on down the line, presumably some future direct, when we're a little bit closer to launch, or maybe once Animal Crossing has launched and people are kind of over that, then they'll start getting into more Pokemon details further on down the line. But they didn't really give us any clue about what any of that would be, so whether or not I was right about any of my predictions there is anyone's guess. So, I think I have gushed enough about this trailer footage. I hope I have avoided getting content ID strikes on my channel, because that would suck. And if you've enjoyed this video, well, then you should feel very free to hit the like button down below. You should also feel free to subscribe to the channel, where I will be definitely talking more about Pokemon, I think tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, because I do have a guest over at the moment, so I should probably not be spending all my time on the computer making videos. I'll be doing a character analysis video for the 3 new starters that have been put out for Pokemon. Essentially, like my What's the Deal videos, where I'll be talking about what their character design is like, what kinds of, like, the Pokemon aesthetic, how Pokemon designs new characters, how Pokemon designs their monsters to be appealing, and especially what they do with color and stuff like that. That's coming tomorrow, so subscribe if you want to see that, and hit the bell icon, and do the like button just for fun, just because you can. And if you want to support the channel directly, well, you can head on over to Patreon and subscribe there for anything you might want. If you have $1 a month that you might be using for rent, I'd be grateful to receive it. Soon, I will also be turning on YouTube memberships on the channel, and I'll have a video out explaining why that is a little bit later on down the line. So if you want to use YouTube memberships. They'll be available soon, and you'll get access to some emotes if you want to hang out in the chat when we stream and stuff like that. And if you don't want to do a subscription thing, if you don't want to subscribe to something and give me money on like a regular basis, but you just want to give me a tip and say, hey, that was a good job you did with the thing that you did, well, down below you can find links to some stuff that helps you support the channel. You can either donate directly via PayPal, via the Streamlabs link down there, or you can donate via Coffee, which is a service where you can give me a little tip that says, hey, here's $3 to buy a coffee as a thumbs up for making the video. Funding is tough and annoying, and the money of doing YouTube is annoying, so I'm going to have to find a better way to explain all of that in future videos. But that's not really what we're doing right now. If you've not enjoyed this video, there is a dislike button down below. Well, there is a dislike button, and you can click it, but once you click the dislike button, you will be prompted to choose one of 3 wholly distinct dislike buttons with various advantages and disadvantages that you will take with you in your further adventures, and who will hopefully be good partners to you in the videos in the future that you may choose to dislike. You have to be careful about which dislike button you choose, though, because some dislike buttons are very effective against long-form analysis videos like this one, but some of them have a particular weakness against meme videos. They just really don't do well against them, can't really do anything. So you should think carefully about it. There's some online guides that you can consult about how you want to train your dislike button and how you want to evolve it into a more powerful dislike button that can do more damage to the analytics of videos that you do not enjoy. So once you feel ready to do that, well, you can click on it and there will be a lengthy tutorial telling you exactly how to do absolutely everything with your dislike button, even though you've been doing dislike buttons for like 20 years at this point, and you already know how dislike buttons work, and you don't need some old man to show you how to throw Pokeballs at things. We've already done this a million times over. God damn it, just let me catch a freaking Ekans or something. I think I got a little bit off track there. Thank you very much for watching.